This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Mark Magnuson.
Hello and welcome into Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Mark Magnuson. Today is Thursday, May 15th, 2025, and we're so glad you can join us for today's show. In today's episode, I will be joined for the closing markets by Sam Trainor of agmarket.net. A lot happening today on the soybean side of the grain markets. We'll get into that later in the show. But first, I am joined by Matt Herman of the Iowa Soybean Association for the latest edition of Between the Pods, as we learn about farmers fueling the future.
It's time to go between the pods with the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network and the Iowa Soybean Association. For the next year, we will explore the ways Iowa-grown soybeans are making a difference at home and around the world. Now, here's your host of Between the Pods, Mark Magnuson.
Mark Magnuson on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm joined today by Matt Herman. We're at the Iowa Soybean Association, and today we're talking about farmers fueling the future for Between the Pods. Matt, could you, first of all, thanks for joining me here today. Could you just give us an overview of farmers fueling the future, please?
Sure, happy to, Mark. So Farmer Fueling the Future is a new initiative that was led by the Iowa Soybean Association and also the American Soybean Association. And what we recognized over the last 18 months, and probably many of the farmers, the listeners, recognize as well, was we were fundamentally going through a change in the biofuels marketplace. And it was a change that I don't think many farmers and frankly folks in the ag community really liked, right? We saw huge imports of things like used cooking oil, and quite frankly, we saw products like soybean oil were once the dominant feedstock used in biofuel production really get dethroned. And the ag groups like Iowa Soybean Association, the American Soybean Association, and even state partners like Missouri were asking the question, what's happened? What's happened over the last 15 years? How did we get here? And how do we turn this around for farmers?
So bridging off of that point, I guess, what did, in your mind, kind of turn things so that it caused this to kind of go maybe in a different direction than farmers were expecting? Yeah,
well, I think farmers are aware that as the biofuel market has evolved since really, 2007, 2005, policy, right, and has played a bigger role in the market development and creating that demand signal. And really what we saw post-COVID was there was this huge boom and expansion of renewable diesel capacity, largely led by refiners and some household names that farmers would recognize. But as that boom and expansion happened, right, they needed raw material. And so because they were short raw material, because policies and markets incentivized them to do certain things, we just saw this huge wave of importations of things like animal fats and used cooking oils from places like Asia and South America. And it really came at the expense of soybean oil. Now, of course, soybean crush has expanded the last few years and more of it's available, but nonetheless, we've seen these policy and market signals hang around that have left soybeans now in kind of a disadvantaged position relative to these waste fats and oils like used cooking oil in this new expanded marketplace.
So thinking back kind of to the start then for biofuels, farmers really helped to grow that market. And now are farmers at risk of losing that market?
Right, I think that's a good point. I mean, when you look back at this, and this is of course before my time coming into the industry, but as I look at the data, soybean oil at the time was really a drag on the price of meal back in the early 2000s. And it was farmers like in Iowa and in Missouri and in other Midwest states that got together and leveraged their checkoff investments to say, what can we do to create a home for this oil so we don't have the story, we hear in the industry of Big Bertha sitting up in the Dakotas with 1 million gallons of oil in it and nothing to do. And they created this biofuel industry, and it's grown from effectively, a few million gallons to well over 5 billion gallons today. But like you mentioned, we are at this potential risk of losing this, or at least losing the dominant position that farmers have played in this market for so long. And so there's key things that we've got to do to relook at these markets and these policy signals to really get this market, in my mind, back on track for farmers.
So what is the argument then from the other side when you think specifically about something like used cooking oil? Would it be that it has just more sustainability in the long run? Is that their argument?
Yeah, I think you've got a couple arguments. One is we need all the supply we can get, right? And that makes sense, right? we're making in the neighborhood of 5.5 billion gallons of these biomass-based diesel products. We got a 60 billion gallon domestic market. So I'm sitting back absolutely saying, we need all the supply we can get if we're going to tackle that market. But what we see is, to your point, certain policies, both federally and at the state level, have effectively determined that cooking oil has a lower carbon footprint. It deserves a greater incentive. And it's, kind of my opinion that it's not necessarily that they've got the score for cooking oil wrong. It's that they've got the score for soybeans dead wrong. It's that many of these markets at the state and federal level have kind of these punishing penalties on soybeans. There's assuming that, my dad's out there tilling up his back 40 to plant soybeans. They have this concept that there's all this land use change. So a big piece of this is, putting American agriculture and farmers, what they've done here, back at the center of this conversation and saying, well, the representation of soybean oil's carbon footprint is really what's going on in the U.S., not what's going down in Brazil.
So, Matt, when you think about some of those key issues then that this group would like to kind of look at and help to address, what are kind of some of those issues that farmers should be thinking about?
Well, the number one issue we just kind of touched on is this land use change concept. And so, farmers, they hear a lot about kind of 45Z and the federal biofuels policy. Well, the number one thing that disadvantages soybeans from, say, things like used cooking oil is this concept of land use change. And if we can eliminate that, we're going to be really close to parity then with used cooking oil. So kind of our A1 task is, how do we remove this concept of land use change from as many policies as we can, as many markets as we can, to actually drive that value, that makes processors and the oil companies and the airlines want to buy soybean oil. We also know, like I mentioned, that there's some problems with the used cooking oil score. We know that while this product was once a waste, it is no longer a waste. It's a traded commodity. You can find markets where used cooking oil is trading equivalent to virgin soybean oil. That tells me that it's not really a waste and it shouldn't be treated as a waste from a carbon accounting standpoint. And then I think one other issue, there's a whole laundry list I could go through here, but maybe one other issue just to touch on is we see that markets globally, in the EU, in Canada, in California, even federally, they're starting to require farmers to do some level of field level certification. Hey, guarantee that your soybeans that are going into biofuels came from an acre that isn't deforested. That's going to be a market access challenge that we feel the ag groups are primed to figure out how to solve that challenge for farmers. Of course, it affects the energy community, the oil refiners, but they don't know farmers, they don't know ag policy, and that's where groups like Iowa Soybean, the American Soybean Association, and others feel like we can step in and help close that gap.
So from the farmer's perspective, would it come down to simply that they would like to see some of these barriers to entry maybe at least lowered a little bit, and then that ability to, like you said, show that they're performing these practices the right way that they know? Yeah,
well, absolutely. At the end of the day, today we know that the bioenergy market has been tilted to an unlevel playing field. Farmers are producing a higher quality product. They've got a more rateable, sustainable supply of it, but yet markets aren't recognizing that. So we've got to tilt this balance, back towards farmers, because frankly, they're the ones who created this industry. And if this industry is going to grow, it's going to grow on the backs of farmers providing more material. And so we've got to get the market signal right for them.
So what have farmers told you and others then about what they would like to see from biofuel policy? Is it just some of the things that we've already talked about? And I guess anything else you'd like to add in that area?
Yeah, I think certainty, right? Farmers are in this period, right, where they have a lot of uncertainty in their marketplace, whether this is on the trade front, even the domestic utilization front. And if we can provide, biofuels isn't the only leg of the stool, but it is a critical leg of the stool, not just for soybeans, but for corn as well. And so anything that we can do to provide some market certainty, ensuring the tax credit's going to be there, or putting them in a more favorable position towards their feedstocks in a more favorable position relative to things like used cooking oil, we hear that loud and clear. We also hear things from them like, hey, this is a U.S. tax credit. Let's make sure it's funding and supporting U.S. activity. Loud and clear, those are also activities that we're going to work on. But things like, the used cooking oil thing, these are issues that farmers have highlighted for us loud and clear, like this is a problem. But frankly, they haven't been able to rely on their fuel trade associations to do that research because oftentimes they have members who are using these used cooking oils. So this is where it puts ag groups like Iowa Soybean Association and our partners kind of in that pole position to really do this research on behalf of the ag community.
So then just to wrap up here today, Matt, what would be the best move for farmers that maybe want to learn more about this or get involved in any way and maybe help out?
Yeah, so farmers can absolutely jump online. They can go to the Iowa Soybean website. We've got information on there about the current effort. They can also check their Iowa Soybean Review if they get the print publication. There's a story in there this month about it. But please feel free to reach out, contact me. My information's on the website. I'm co-leading this effort along with Scott Gerlt, who's the American Soybean Association's chief economist. So you can really see where we're trying to put the advocacy resources together with the research resources that we need to make this work for farmers. But please don't hesitate to reach out for us. This effort was really designed to put the focus, the resources, and the efforts back in the hands of farmers for us to help drive a market and a picture that works for them.
He is Matt Herman of the Iowa Soybean Association, talking farmers fueling the future here today on Between the Pods. Matt, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you to Matt Herman of the Iowa Soybean Association for joining today's episode of Ag Matters PM. It is time now for the closing markets. I will be joined by Sam Trainor of agmarket.net. But first, a word from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soybean Checkoff.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
It's time now for the closing markets here on Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. And I'm joined today by Sam Trainor of agmarket.net. Sam, the soy oil market and the soybeans have been in the spotlight here today. What's been the story with the trade in the grains?
You hit the nail on the head there. Soybean oil lock limit down pretty much the entire trading session today, down $3. And that's all based on comments that came out yesterday afternoon. EPA Director Lee Zeldin announcing that the Renewable Fuel Standard, RFS, rulemaking proposal is not going to come out until, he said, over the next few months was his direct quote. And many were expecting that announcement to be coming out this month. They're already behind the eight ball on that. We were looking for an announcement on that back in January, and they just keep kicking the can down the road. So that was seen as negative there for the soy complex. And as I mentioned, soybean oil was lock limit down most of the day, and that brought soybeans down along with it.
And Sam, I know there was also quite a few lawmakers here in the Midwest that were hoping to not only get those rules from the RVOs released, but actually see those blending volumes go up. So just looking at this on the surface, do you think this is bad news for that? Do you think it's not in the cards to increase that volume if they're kicking the can down the road on making these rules?
It's certainly not going to help anything out by any means. I think you're on the right train of thought there as far as not, the incentive is probably not there like they were anticipating that it would be. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. And I mean, he didn't give any specifics. Like I said, he just said over the next few months. So that could mean next month. It could mean September. Hopefully not. But we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens here.
Over on the other side of the ag marketplace, what happened with the trade for cattle and hogs today?
Cattle futures continued their ugly sell-off yesterday on the charts, made a very ugly key reversal lower. And what that entails is that we made a new contract high. This was both in the feeders and the fats, so make a new life of contract highs, and then turned around and closed lower on the day. In the feeder cattle markets, it actually took out the gap higher that we saw earlier in the week. So really, really negative day on the charts there. Saw a lot of volatility, a lot of funds liquidating positions. And today we just saw more of that, just continued selling. We were down sharply looking at the fats. They were down about $3.50, and the feeders were down over $6. So another ugly day. The way this market's been trading here, it seems like as we get to the end of the month here, the funds liquidate their position, take a little money out, and then as that front month contract goes into delivery, they realize that they need to catch back up to the cash because they're so far off, and then we rally sharply again into delivery on those contracts. At least that's what we saw with the April contract, and looks like we're primed for maybe something similar again here on the June.
And then what about the hog side?
Hog side actually saw a little bit of strength today. Nearby hogs up over $1 today. So maybe a little counter trade to the cattle, eating less beef, maybe buying more pork here. So maybe a little spread trading between the two.
Sam Trainor, agmarket.net, our guest for closing markets today. Sam, what's the best way for our viewers to get in touch for more marketing information?
Best way would be to give our office a call here in Normal at 1-800-779-1515, or you can go to our website and click on Intel. That'll get you a free trial of our app and emailed information that's on our website there at agmarket.net.
Sam, thanks so much for the time. Always appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Mark. You too.
Thank you to Sam Trainor of agmarket.net for joining today's show. Let's take a look at how the markets closed, and you can find that information on our website anytime under the Markets tab at iowaagnet.com.
July corn closes up 3 cents at 448.5. July soybeans down 26.5 at 1051.25. July soybean meal up 450 at 296.40. July soybean oil down $3 at 49.32. Chicago wheat up 8 cents at 532 3/4. Minneapolis wheat up 3 cents at 580 even. Kansas City hard red wheat up 5 1/4 at 528 1/4. July oats up 1 1/4 at 340 even. On the Merc, June live cattle down 278 at 211.18. May feeder cattle down 340 at 296.18. June lean hogs up $1.85 at $100.70. June pork cutout up $1.30 at $105.43. Class 3 milk up 15 cents at $18.63.
That wraps up the closing markets on today's show and brings us to the end of this episode. You can find all of our content on our website at iowaagnet.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click on the notification icon as well. And you can listen to our morning, midday, and closing market podcast wherever you find your favorite podcast at Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and Podbean. Also check out our daily episodes of our Iowa Ag Matters podcast. You can follow us on social media as well at Facebook, X, TikTok, and LinkedIn. From the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network studios in Des Moines, I'm Mark Magnuson. For Riley Smith, Dustin Huffman, and Andy Peterson, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.